Hello, everyone. Welcome to All Out Pharma Digital. It's that time of the year. It's the Olympics opening day. And when we started our first LinkedIn Live as a group of pharmaceutical industry professionals and medical across different companies, it actually happened to be on the opening day of the Tokyo Olympics. And so we're keeping the tradition, the spirit of the Olympics. And I would love to introduce to you my two distinguished colleagues whom I'm lucky to call my friends as well, who work at different companies whom I've known for quite a few years now. So they're our guest speakers, and there's others in our group that are also listening in. So William Murray-Brown and Angela Valadez. Angela, Will, please introduce yourselves. Great to see you.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation, Tim. My name's Will. I am a Brit living in Australia. I'm an MSL, coming up to 3 years, actually, in this role. I work for BMS in the immunology space. And actually, I should say that while BMS is my employer, today my views are my own and don't represent anything that the company would or wouldn't endorse.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, great to see you. Angela.
Yes, I'm Angela Valadez, and I am based here in Kansas City, Missouri. I work for Regeneron in their ophthalmology therapeutic area. So I'm excited to kind of be a part of this and kind of learn more about metrics and share what I know or what I've experienced through being an MSL.
Great. Yes. So in the spirit of the Olympics, I thought, why not add a little bit of music to our session here, to our special edition for the Olympics. And so we'll add a little bit of musical flavor as people are joining. All right. And
I wish I had a little British flag to wave while that was
yeah. So we live in a world where all of us can connect from across the globe on LinkedIn, across social media. So we're live on Facebook, on YouTube as well. And I think Olympics is a great example of team spirit, sportsmanship. So we're redefining that, just having our group across social, right? So I want to ask you what your favorite events are, if any, at the Winter Olympics. Angela?
Oh, I have to say, I kind of like as I call them, the adrenaline rush events, like the skeleton, the luge, the bobsled. Those, yeah. I mean, I think all the sports are really fun to watch because I'm not a winter person, so I enjoy the winter at the Olympics, watching the athletes. So, but those are probably my top picks. If I have time to watch, I'm going to make time for those.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. I haven't actually given it that much thought because it's summer here in Australia, and I've been focused on the tennis here, and it's been a fantastic tournament here in Melbourne, and very happy to see Rafa win his 21st major. However, I am into snow sports. I think the downhill or anything on a snowboard would really interest me. And like Angela said, those adrenaline sports, I think, really kind of you immerse yourself in that experience, and it's so tense that I would definitely be drawn to those.
Yeah, and speaking of adrenaline, I missed some adrenaline of going on LinkedIn Live with the technology and with everything. So that was another reason that I wanted to get some momentum going and connect with our friends, across different colleagues, the Medical Affairs Professional Society as well, where I think all of us are very active. So here is some of the topics that we're going to talk about. But we recently had a webinar in our Medical Affairs Professional Society where we polled a lot of our global colleagues to ask them about whether or not they felt that metrics and KPIs are meaningful. And these are some of the results that we we saw that there is a lot of lack of, there's a lack of clarity on metrics that we've somewhat been used to over the years and over decades, with only 5% actually responding affirmatively. So I'd love to get your comments later as we get into our discussion. And then the second question that we also asked on this webinar was, what percentage of the final performance is based on behavior and culture? So in that Olympic spirit where performance and sportsmanship are probably both contributing to our ultimate outcomes, you see that the responses were quite scattered, but quite encouraging as well. And it's very difficult to quantify behaviors, and there are various different innovative companies that are doing that with net promoter score, that are moving away from those financial bottom line types of metrics, and such as Adidas, Slack, Salesforce. But mostly, I think my argument is that we've been very accustomed to demonstrating our value as pictures or images, such as the one you see here, right? Which leaves a lot to interpretation, right? And lack of clarity, which those poll results, I think, show. So these are some of the questions and some of the topics that I would love to get your opinions on, Will and Angela, and others also. So feel free to comment, our friends and colleagues as well. So facts versus myths. Since we titled this Facts versus Myths, what are some myths, let's say, of performance metrics? I came up with 3, but I would love to get your suggestions as well. Anybody want to start? One, for example, that I thought about was that metrics mean more competition, right? As soon as you start talking about metrics and KPIs, whether it's in medical and pharma or across the industries, people think that it means all of a sudden they're taken aback, right? They think it's more competition. People are not going to collaborate, right? But one of the reasons why I'm so inspired to talk about this topic is because I've seen a lot of very competitive teams in the commercial side be also very collaborative and enjoy their job, the nature of the job, and actually stand up for each other and stand up for others on medical as well. So is that one myth, and how do you see it across our industry or your friends and colleagues?
To me, I don't think metrics increase competition. I feel like they almost level the playing field, because then everybody knows the expectation and can work towards it together. And, you mentioned the commercial teams that were competitive but collegial. I think that's what metrics can achieve if designed correctly and if communicated to the teams.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think actually for any of your listeners, if they haven't listened to the webinar that was hosted by MAPS at the beginning of the year, I think it definitely is worth a good listen. I think in terms of what metrics can do in medical affairs, I think it's a really important process to reflect and actually help an individual develop. Perhaps one of the differences that I think is worth highlighting with a commercial team is that in medical affairs, or MSLs tend, in my experience at least, to cover much larger territories. So actually there may not be in any given company a good comparison or peer within your therapy area, and it can be, I think, a bit challenging sometimes to compare your performance in one therapy area versus an MSL in a totally different business unit or therapy area. Whereas in that commercial space, maybe we're talking about different territories, but they're all working on the same product as sales managers or HSRs, for example. So I think it does have to be taken in context, definitely. But without any metrics, I think that there's really no way to formalize a process of how you can develop and improve. So I think they are critical.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge some of our colleagues and friends. Sasan Azad is joining us in medical affairs from Ontario, from Canada. So we have a very international audience, and thank you for your support, Sasan. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Carol Scrafton from Northeast UK. Will, so you have a country person, countrywoman joining us. Mark Lynn is saying hello from Netherlands. Make sure to ask us some questions, some topics. I think it's we have so much data and so many ways to capture metrics today more than ever before that I think it's one way to. I think it's a very timely topic, particularly in medical, in type of field where a lot of our contributions span an entire organization, but they're not always immediately understood or known or acknowledged, right? We have Mark Lynn. So here's one comment here. Oh, okay. So he's following along passively. Good. So what about facts? I mean, what are some things that you're clear about then? Because are there any when you both are in the medical field, right, and as a medical science liaisons, where you we all develop relationships with scientific leaders, right, global cutting edge researchers, and our value really is to develop relationships with them, and so yet we have to be accountable for them, right? So, any facts, anything that you're clear about versus unclear for any of you?
Well, I think from the perspective of metrics in our engagements with thought leaders, I think it's clear that we need things that are quite easy to use on a day-to-day basis. I think my experience is that we could be looking at more detailed metrics and actually utilizing that wealth of data that you've just referenced that we have a little bit better. I think that there is this whole side of our performance, which is not necessarily a activity like a number of engagements, for example, but are behavior based, which I think we do need better metrics for, or we need to actually quantify these and have that a bit clearer. And it all goes back to the performance or the development of the individual, because if we can actually conceptualize exactly how we're performing with numbers, then I think it really helps to improve our development as individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The second myth that we mentioned during that webinar was that metrics are confused with outcomes. We often confuse them, right? And we use these phrases interchangeably and measure them retrospectively. However, they're different, right? I argued in that webinar, for example, that outcomes are measured by metrics, which are estimates of the relationship between the activities and those results that we seek and that we desire, right? So do you agree with that, first of all? I mean, we can have a great debate here and discussion and feel, we're colleagues and we know each other a long time, and that's how the innovative ideas originate, right? From disagreement and from reinventing those ideas. But do you think that we often get those confused, metrics and outcomes? Is that one myth? Anybody want to comment?
Yeah, I do feel that we do interchange those words, that metrics equals outcomes, and that's not necessarily correct. You might be able to, if you're looking at, say, the number of scientific exchanges, achieve that goal, but that doesn't necessarily mean you had an impact or the desirable outcome. And I think it's finding a way to measure, that not only are you, building these relationships, having these conversations, but you're also able to demonstrate that through that work, there is an outcome, there is some type of impact. And I think that's where it gets hard to measure, because granted, we're all humans, we're talking, our physicians are humans, so there's so much variability. So how does that quantify? How do you determine that relationship from the activity to the outcome?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, agreed. I think before actually sitting down and thinking about this, perhaps I would have assumed that metrics and outcomes were the same, but thinking more deeply about it, they are obviously quite different. And the simple explanation that perhaps I would use to illustrate is that, we might consider something like number of engagements as a metric, but we don't do engagements just for engagement's sake. We don't meet doctors just for the sake of meeting doctors. We have medical objectives that are on our medical plan, and whether it be around medical education, building advocacy, even just maybe we might be new to a therapy area as a company, so we need to actually understand more about the therapy area. So these are all the outcomes, and those metrics of engagement feed into the outcomes and are a component of it. And it's important to make sure that they are linked and that the metrics are relevant for the outcomes, but they are not the same thing.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge a few of our colleagues as well who are joining. Monica Aurora Suhatme from Washington, D.C., Executive Director, Field Medical Affairs. I know she's attended our webinar, so feel free to ask us any questions and comments as well. Thanks for joining. And also we have Elizabeth Gutierrez-Hoyt, who's new to MA, and she's learning about metrics as well. So interested in the topic. So that's great to hear. So the other myth, right, that I wanted to get your thoughts on was that metrics are meaningless, right? We hear that also, that it's actually the bottom line outcome that counts. So if you really measure both, you confuse both, right, and you don't really specifically differentiate one from the other, then how do you scale those outcomes if you don't really do that root cause analysis of what activities lead to those outcomes, right? And so I think a lot of the innovative companies like Adidas, Slack, and we're able to bring in some of those best practices from other industries into medical. I think where they're actually asking questions like, how likely are you to recommend this product or this brand to someone else, instead of just relying on the financial outcomes, right, on the P&L? Because I interviewed Tiffany Bova, for example, from Salesforce. She's Chief Growth Officer there, and she demonstrated that based on her research that 80% of the success of products are not due to product attributes, but due to patient experience, which are kind of qualitative, right, metrics. So I wanted to get your comments on this as we're getting some others from the feed as well, those who are joining. Anybody? Will, Angela? In terms of metrics are meaningless, it's really the outcomes that count. Because we've heard that from many skeptics, right, for many years. But
personally, I think that they're both really important. Perhaps from a company-wide perspective, it's the outcome that is the main focus. However, if you want that, and it goes back to what I said before, you need something to help the individual with their professional development and to reflect on how they're performing, and metrics are a really, really useful tool for that. To allow for growth and development so that you can achieve those outcomes either more efficiently or maybe more of these outcomes in the future. So they are really, they're both important. They serve different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And, sometimes I think it's just maybe a misperception of metrics, and that can be why they are viewed as meaningless. But I think when there's an understanding of both what the metric is, what the outcome is, and how they are tied together, you really need one to achieve the other. And I think, once there's a better understanding, then there's some kind of a mind shift to that, this isn't just an exercise, futility. There is a purpose to it. And I agree with Will that it really does help the individual to develop. And that's what we really want is, because the more a person develops, the better they can contribute and reach those outcomes and, learn from past experiences, be more efficient in achieving the outcome or developing new outcomes to reach.
Yeah. So we're getting some good comments here. Nancy Ortiz, whom I've known for many, many years, by the way. Glad she found time to join us. I actually started my career, my first job as an MSL at AstraZeneca, and she was a senior colleague of mine. And she says, outcomes are analogous to impact or value. How do you measure the impact of value of scientific engagement with thought leaders? Yeah, it's a very challenging question, right? Because we're really that's where our value comes in, developing relationships.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question, and perhaps the $1 million question that could I think revolutionize metrics. And I read your white paper on LinkedIn from 2019, and you referenced this in the MAPS webinar at the beginning of the year. The performance,
the medical productivity index.
Medical productivity index. Thank you.
MPI.
And so this I think goes some way to trying to weight more valuable outcomes in terms of an individual's performance. I think it is a real challenge. At the end of the day, there's no, in my experience at least, we can call an interaction with a thought leader 1 point, let's say, and if we actually hit many bases in that interaction and cover a lot of topics and gain lots of insights, we might be able to assign a bit more weight to the value of that particular interaction. If we go as far as trying to think about an interaction or an insight that actually changes company policy or strategy, I think that it does become a lot more difficult in that scenario. I mean, I personally feel like there isn't really one insight that might change the strategy of a company. It's many insights over lots of interactions that build up to actually create a picture, a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. You're piecing these bits together, and with the senior leadership in the company, you're talking about what these insights mean, and then suddenly, after maybe weeks, it dawns on you that actually this is really meaningful and you might need to change your strategy. So actually keeping track of where that happens, I think is a real challenge. But certainly I think that there is scope to track more meaningful and valuable activities. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Tim, because I know you spend a lot of time on this, and what you think the challenges or opportunities are.
This is, I mean, there's something that I feel strongly about, where I think that there's a need to develop some form of estimate, which is imperfect. It's an index, right? But nevertheless, it should inspire you to behave some way in the future, right? So whereas we've been used to relying on the numbers of interactions, right, that sometimes are actually directed towards the end of the year, whereas before they're not really clarified, or they may be not emphasized, because we understand that medical affairs demonstrates their impact through quality, but unfortunately that accountability always comes into play at some point of the year, right? And that's why it's great to speak about it early in the year, and actually to measure it, and also to rank it, to prioritize all the different activities. So what we've done actually at some of my prior companies, I'm not going to go into the details, is that we have piloted it, to some extent with some of us. And, initially it was very difficult. We were met with a lot of objections, right? Challenges, for the obvious reasons. However, some of us piloted this, and also we complemented the quantitative part with the outcomes, where we defined outcomes, actually, those qualitative outcomes that, for example, Nancy's talking about. right, is asking us, or that you just mentioned. And these outcomes being defined as learning and teaching information to internal or external stakeholders that end up changing behavior or strategy. That's how we specifically defined an outcome. And we actually captured them over retrospectively on a monthly basis. And in the pilot for the medical productivity index, we captured activities prospectively. And so the benefit of that was that we significantly cut down the time of the performance review process at the end. And we're also, so from a scientific point of view, you can draw on particular correlations to see which activities, which metrics may have contributed to those outcomes. So we had both a different spreadsheet that was a retrospective one, and then a prospective kind of metrics where we didn't just consider all of our activities as a hit. If in that baseball analogy from that white paper, which is what we've been used to, but some of our activities are home runs. We gather some insights, right? One insight that we then discuss amongst each other on a journal club that I've seen lead to a late-breaking presentation at a major scientific conference, right? And that turned around the trajectory of an entire company, not just medical affairs.
Sorry, Tim. That pushback that you experience when you try to implement this, I do feel like that's understandable because of the amount of tracking and analysis that an individual and a team would have to do. How did it feel to transition from a very simple metric like days in field or percent in field to something a lot more complicated like this, that is once you've set it up, is very easy to use, but still you've got to actually remember to go into the spreadsheet and update it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. It's just I guess that there's one more thing for us MSLs to do, and we've already got a lot of admin. So I wondered how it felt.
Well, it's based, you learn in medical affairs to do more with less, right? So we had a spreadsheet to us, but what if you were able to convert that into a CRM, customer relationship management tool, which essentially you can do because it's just a sum formula, that assigns, let's say, 1 point to an interaction, 10 points to a publication, for example, on a range from 1 to 10 based on the relevance to strategy and also the frequency. So if something is likely to occur very frequently, it's going, such as a regular KOL interaction, it may be scored 1 point, right? So it actually forced us, those of us who piloted it, to be more accountable, to be more accountable and to ourselves first and foremost. Right, and and also understand how to look into the future, right? How does how does this rank? How do I grow over time within my territory, within, let's say, my region? So my argument is that it's a little bit, it's a work, but it's a platform. And it just takes a little bit more time and thinking early in the year, January, first quarter. But once you have that platform, it's not like anything else that we're doing now. All the different spreadsheets and Viva and all this, but it's very, very, very much similar, I think.
So on a practical level, you would use a CRM and export an Excel spreadsheet with your data, and then use that as a spreadsheet to calculate your performance.
Yes, you could do that. I think it can be done. Now, we didn't do that when we piloted it, and I'm not going to speak where and how, but we just went with this Excel spreadsheet. But I know that I know that CRMs can be customized, and you can, even though we're used to capturing all of our external activities in CRM, I know that some companies sometimes capture internal activities, because a lot of the value that medical can bring is when we train commercial and sales, right? Because those are the assists that lead to the points. They're like, right? It's not just the goals, but it's also about the assists that lead to goals, right? That also have to be recognized, I think, in a hockey kind of analogy. But I think the internal activities can be also measured and captured in CRM and Viva, for example, and you can export them into a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet has just a formula. It's a simple sum formula. And I think the two topics that we probably should mention also is that in addition to these MSL points, right, that are ranked, that adjust for the different activities and our impact, is that we have surveys, right? And these surveys, as a part of that MPI, that I think right now is at more of a concept stage, but when you survey people who are most likely or most directly impacted by metrics, such as, let's say, your manager, your colleague, your teammate, as well as your cross-functional teammate, right? And internal surveys that are simple, 1 minute to complete, that have no open-ended text, but the questions have to be asked in the right way. And the Medical Affairs Workbook, which everyone can actually access, it's a free resource to everyone, it actually goes into that detail. And we'll be presenting it at MAPS in New Orleans in March, by the way, live at the Global Annual Meeting. So we have a workshop there planned. And then there's the external survey, where you actually get feedback from those external customers whom you impact. And it shouldn't be, so these should be bi-directional, right? And also they should be, or multi-directional, really, because you want to get the feedback from KOLs that's unbiased. So I think that these surveys should be collected by a third party rather than by a company, right? Because I know some companies, for example, they have a Viva Engage, right? Viva CRM system, and they present, let's say, to a customer some information, and they're able to immediately capture their sentiment. Do they agree? Do they find that positive, negative, no? Or that's the kind of survey. But questions like, to what extent does this scientist, external, this customer, thought leader, feel that the MSL is genuinely concerned about the patients and their institution? That's a behavior, right, type of question. Or how clearly do they communicate the information? How timely is that information being communicated? And whether or not they would recommend that MSL to another KOL because of their expertise. These are three examples of questions that are in that external survey. And the way this MPI is structured, it has 5 questions for external KPI, external physicians, let's say, right, or pairs. And so they're shorter, right? They're 5 questions only in terms of both performance and behavior. They take about a minute to complete. They're scored. And the internal surveys are 10 questions. You can average the scores, but there's no open-ended text, and it cuts down a lot on the performance review, and also provides you with some kind of estimate. That's more bi-directional. That's a little bit more scientifically, that's rooted. It's a little bit more scientific than we've been used to, I think, in a scientific function. So, Angela, you have any thoughts? I see you not.
I do. I mean, because I agree, but I have a question, because I definitely understand,
Sure.
like, internal surveys. I think our cross-functional partners would definitely respond promptly. My question is, do you think KOLs would? We spend a lot of time with them. We ask a lot of them, and it's going to be, as you explained, a very simple survey, a minute or less to complete.
Right.
But if it's sent to them via email, are they going to respond? And then if they don't respond, I mean, as I take it, there's 5 that will go out. How does that impact the employee that's being evaluated if there is no response?
Mm-hmm.
How is that adjusted for, if that were to occur?
Right. Yeah. If there's no response, that means there's no data. The more data you have, the more accurate, right, the index is. So I think that if there's no data, then it should not be considered. But when there is when there is some information that's gathered, I think it's important that it distributes the accountability among people, from both the KOL also. So that's a logistic question that I think needs to be addressed somehow by medical affairs. But I argue that it should not be an employee, anyone from the company, who should be circulating that, and it should probably come at some time close to the meeting, within, let's say, a week, in order to make sure that there's no recall bias or anything else. But I think
how do you choose?
Yeah.
How do you choose the KOLs?
How do you choose the KOLs? So yes, so in that workbook, I provide some ideas in terms of potentially asking the same KOL over time. So what you can do is, over 4 quarters, somebody who's more likely to respond, with whom an MSL has a good rapport or an exchange, same KOL is being asked those 5 questions by a third party. And that's the way to demonstrate some kind of delta or change or evolution of that relationship, for example. And that's very important in order to make sure that this is agreed upon between, I think, the MSL and their manager in terms of the choice. And I think that the MSL should also have a vote in terms of who, but not only. So these are all things that can be, I think, factors that can be customized, but thought about well in advance, I think. And the more data that you are able to collect, the more predictable, that metric may be of the outcome that you're seeking. But we definitely would love to discuss this in March as well. So I know you're both active in MAPS, so feel free to share your comments and suggestions also, because this is a continuous conversation. And the webinar that we had in January 7th, was a continuation of that discussion that was based on the white paper that MAPS had, and a great white paper, by the way, that's also published, that talks about the fact that, look, we have a large menu of metrics, but we need to understand how to separate the signals from the noise to see which ones are meaningful. So Carol read your mind there. Carol Scrafton, Will, or that was, William. Yep. William. So she had the same question regarding how do you choose. But any suggestions right now of just anything in terms of how to make those surveys a little bit more effective?
No, I mean, I think the suggestions that you have in the guide and the various content are good, as long as management are on board, and I think there's agreement that they're the right questions. Actually, maybe the MSL doesn't need to be involved in the question generation, but as long as they're targeting the behaviors that the company wants to elicit in their employees, I think that they should really be focusing on the behaviors that the company stands up for. So actually, it should probably be the same set of questions for all field force in that respect then, because there's the same set of behaviors that any given company might endorse.
Mm-hmm. I would almost argue, though, that I almost feel like the MSL should be a part of the question generation, or at least be aware of the questions. I agree that it's based on behaviors, but I also feel like there could be more buy-in to the whole process and to the behaviors that are desired if you involve more people, the people that are being evaluated on these. If you involve them and get their buy-in, I think there might be better acceptance and outcomes.
Yeah, really good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of the data, from management consultants shows very clearly that you're most likely to achieve the goals that you set yourself. And that's why in that metric scoring system that I came up with also, which is essentially a self-assessment or a checklist, it has 10 items in it, right? And where one of them is autonomous, right? That metrics should be collected autonomously also, or they should be somewhat of an involvement, right, of the person that's being evaluated in terms of what goals do they want to set for themselves. So yeah, Angela, I agree with you. How do metrics impact our daily jobs? I mean, I know that we don't like to talk about them. I know there's many people who are confused, but they are passionate about the role. I know all of our medical affairs colleagues, those are in our group, or most of the ones that I know, regardless of that lack of clarity, they love the nature of the job. But nevertheless, it drives some engagement and retention. And I've read data that from Nancy Ortiz that she presented actually at a previous MAPS meeting, where it shows that a lot of the medical affairs professionals change jobs much more frequently than ever before, every year or two now. Do you any comments on how it impacts our daily work, or from your colleagues, or friends? What's their actual impact metrics have on how well we do the job?
Well, I mean, for me and my experience, metrics or quantifiable metrics are quite simple, and I think that it does definitely give a clarity and accountability to how I'm performing. Like we've discussed throughout this meeting, though, I do feel like many medical affairs professionals will probably benefit from a slightly more comprehensive metric assessment based on weighting, if possible, of the value of their activities. So overall, I think it's really positive. And like I said, the professional development that actually having a metric can help with, I think is valuable.
Yeah.
And I feel if metrics are communicated and understood, that it almost serves as a guide to help drive actions. You know what's expected, whether it's quantifiable or or not. It just kind of gives you that roadmap of how you're supposed to be proceeding, not only with reaching your the company's goals, but also maybe your personal goals as well. And that leads to the development. But I really feel like metrics there needs to be buy-in from both parties, the MSL and the manager. But I really feel like they can also be a motivator as well when they're set appropriately. Yeah. And especially when the MSL has a say in it. And I feel like it's also a motivator as well.
No, I agree. I agree about that, and that's why I'd love for us to consider that kind of sports and gamification type of approach, to medical affairs, which we've discussed also, by the way, at Medical Affairs Professional Society as well. So it's a continuous process, right? It's a somewhat of a management. It needs to be managed, this metrics and the data. And ultimately, if you have the CRM tool, right, you need to make sure that that the CRM is working, that you're able to sync your meetings, right? That it's all integrated, that that everyone understands what defines an interaction, for example, right? The definitions have to be consistent in order to make sure that the data has integrity. The more data, the more accurate it becomes, and then you have to, they have to inspire behaviors, as we talked about, right? But then, who do you collect the information and when, right? If we, take a step back and think about medical education, for example. I started my career in medical education publications, by the way, before I, switched into the field medical affairs role. And I've seen many great educational programs, medical education programs, after which these hundreds of people that attend the symposium, they complete the evaluation surveys, right? And the questions may ask, how likely were you to change your clinical practice as a result of this? And so they may receive these responses immediately, in a few months, at random times, Well, what if you get that information earlier, right? Closer to the clinical point of care, right? If you follow up with those who attended, right, and you provide them a link to that medical education program and ask, who you're about, what kind of patients you're going to treat, what condition is this helpful, this program, and then you ask them afterwards as well, right? And so the point of asking them before is that they can it can inspire them to reference that medical education program and maybe use it. And then at the end of, let's say, a week, you ask whether or not they utilize that resource. Did it impact their decisions at all, clinical decision making? So it's just one example of the importance of the timing as well, right? Since I've looked at timing as one of these building blocks of metrics, as I call them, right? So when do you, and I think both of you mentioned, or one of you mentioned this before, when do you collect metrics? I think that determines how meaningful they may be. Knowing the rules, knowing what prioritizes, I think that how we design metrics determines how likely we are to capture information accurately. Because if you don't believe, or if you're not clear about how metrics are collected, you have a lot of high performing cynics, right? And high jump, the reason why I actually shared the high jump photo here is because it's an example of an event that actually rewards performance and behavior equally, because there's steroids or performance enhancing substances do not confer an advantage in this discipline, right? So, and that's why world records have stayed for decades, just like in the long jump, right? And they're tiebreakers. Right, so you have to know: is it like how much of my total performance score is going to be impacted by my behavior? How likely I am to defend, let's say, Will or Angela if we are teammates, or apologize or acknowledge them as appropriate, right? Which are all qualitative, abstract, but they should weigh, I think, 50%. As much to the same extent as performance. And that's one thing we forgot to talk about probably, is that what's unique about this MPI, I think, is that it weighs performance and behavior equally, because that's the only formula where you can redefine competition and really, reward competition to the same extent as collaboration. So that's my long kind of, summary. But which ones of these are, did that resonate with any of you at all? Your comment. Yeah,
definitely. I saw your survey question results at the beginning of this meeting, where people were asked how much of behavior, what percentage of your performance review constitutes behavior.
Right. Yep.
There was a big spread, I think, in terms of that understanding. My experience is that I don't really know actually how much of my performance comes down to behaviors, but I know that it does play a big part because we talk about it a lot. So I think that actually clarifying exactly what that looks like is a really valuable thing. I'm interested to know actually why you chose 50-50. So 50% for the actual kind of more classical metrics and 50% for the behaviors. And what made you just split it down the middle? Is there any reason why you went with that?
Well, Will, I mean, it was really that reason that I felt that it should be equal. That's the only way that you can rationalize maybe communicating rankings, also how someone is rated, to the team or individually, if you do have a team, right? And because when people know that, let's say, a highest performer who has the lowest behavior score after the first quarter, and as a result, they're not number one on the team, but they're number 2 or number 3, for example, that gives that person, I think, a chance to improve on their behaviors, because they know now that it's because of the behavior component, which is just as important as the performance, that they tended to not have the top spot, for example, and they can improve later on. So it was just an equal distribution of accountability, I thought. Accountability is important. And sportsmanship, right?
Yeah.
Like performance and sportsmanship. So that was the only reason. And also another inspiration for that, Will, actually, was a brainstorming session 3 years ago when I was consulting a startup pharmaceutical company that had the best product, in its class. And I was on the culture team, basically. We were we were restructuring the company culture and values. And we thought why not actually maybe potentially weigh performance and behavior, or measure both equally, and so we started some of those discussions started years ago. Now that hasn't been implemented, but I think there's some rationale for it. I don't know. Angela, any? Yeah.
No, I kind of agree that it seems like 50-50 is a good split, because as I was thinking, I feel that behavior is a very important part of the overall, evaluation. And I agree with Will that I have no idea what it quantifies to. I just know it's this portion that we need to embody these behaviors and demonstrate them, regularly. So I feel like if you do have that 50-50 split, then it's really fair. It's not weighting one more than the other. It's that you do have this, and you're recognizing that there are these behaviors, but there are also these other metrics that need to be, achieved. And the combination of those two give you probably the best way to evaluate the overall performance of the individual.
Mm-hmm. I think also in the context of maybe ranking MSLs, and perhaps this is another conversation altogether, but we're all on a different on our own journey as medical affairs professionals. Maybe you might be quite new to the role, so maybe some of those engagements are not quite how you would like, or as detailed as you'd like, or you've got a lot to learn about the role. But if you're embodying those behaviors, then at least you don't feel like you're right at the bottom of the pile, and you've actually got some you can demonstrate value to the company regardless of whether you feel like you might have some progress in your MSL career.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Will, that you just brought up. It made me think about some a classical business management case, W.L. Gore and Associates, in electronic cable and high performance fabrics company, even medical implants. I think they've had, and it's. I read about it recently. I even wrote about it. I think you may have seen it. But I mean, this company's been around since 1958. Bill Gore came from DuPont, where he saw a lot of these teams, these small teams, that skunk works teams that worked very well together. They worked after, they would get together even after work, make sure they completed everything. So he wanted to replicate that in the company that he formed. And in his company, he only has one CEO. He has and no hierarchy at all. All right. And every single employee force ranks everyone else, at least 20 to 30 other people. So they distribute that accountability in a way that doesn't place someone who has a higher tenure at the company at an advantage over someone else new, right? And it has actually led to the company growing 9,000 employees, 6 decades, no annual reports of any loss of profits. They've only shown growth every year. So it has grown. And one interesting thing they do is as soon as their business units grow to over 250 people, they actually break them down and they co-locate them within close proximity to each other. But that allows people to move, to upskill themselves, so even in that kind of culture, they still force ranked and they emphasized metrics. And there was only one criterion, apparently, based on which they force ranked each other, which was to what extent do they believe that their peer is contributing, is making the greatest contribution to that company, and so everybody force ranked each other. But so they were accountable just to each other as well, regardless of whether or not it's your VP who's asking you to get this task done, or some colleague with whom you may have some leeway, you may not be as accountable, right? So that takes care of all that with no hierarchy. And then the force ranking question. So my MPI in a field team, let's say, it allows for people to force rank each other, but it also can be customized. You don't have to, you can choose what points or what results you want to share, whether or not you want to share them one-on-one or with the entire team. I think for full transparency, I'm perfectly fine personally to understand that, look, I may not lose. I may come in third one quarter, but that's going to motivate me, to Angela's point, to try to do better next time. So I wanted to just kind of share that as well, that case study example. Yeah, Angela, I think you had sorry, was there a comment?
No comment.
Oh, okay. So then let's see. There's two comments that I want to acknowledge some of our guests. Mary Lynn Van Polgest Pomfret. So she says, also from the patient perspective and as an umbrella for patient organizations across the globe, we're really lacking in the data knowledge base, metrics, and more. From a patient perspective, she says, so useful to listen to these experts. Okay, great. Thank you for the compliment. And patient perspectives and how we measure our patient education. And yeah, any comments on that? There's another one also I'll show, but first, if there's any comments from you two. No? So I think she brings up a great point, and we can have another discussion at another time, I think, on patient education and patient centricity. Here's this question from Nancy again.
I think
sorry, go ahead, Will.
That's it. That's okay. Just very quickly on that point,
Okay.
I think it's a really important point. I think that you describe actually in your MPI how the patient-centric focus of the MSL can be assessed through the behavioral survey questions that get sent out to KOLs. But definitely there looks like there's more discussion to be had around how we can capture this and actually see that value. Okay.
Yep. We may have some topics on compliance in the future, KOL mapping, medical education. So yeah, so we're definitely taking your comments, everyone, on this, on our group. Nancy. So Nancy mentions here that KPIs are tools that are also used to demonstrate the value, right, with our cross-functional colleagues. Can this be discussed, right? Can it be used as a tool to discuss impact cross-functionally? Yeah, I think what do you? I mean, I definitely have envisioned asking a cross-functional teammate. In fact, in that workbook as a bonus that you can download, I think that's mentioned. And whether or not you have a team, you know, whether you're in medical education, I think a great practice may be to list all your activities, to rank them, prioritize them, and then decide how you measure performance and behaviors, and then who you communicate them and to whom you communicate them and when. So I think that and because that helps you communicate that value across different companies, internally and externally. So yeah.
And
any
to address Nancy's,
I
mean, to address Nancy's question directly, the MPI does have scope to add in quantifiable metrics for cross-functional activities. And I think, as you describe in the literature associated with the MPI, it's really down to the team to define how you actually score or weight those individual tasks. And an example might be training sales teams. So as MSLs, even, we might have the opportunity to contribute to that effort. And if we do that 2 or 3 times a year, then, you know, that would be assigned a certain score or value. I think that thinking about all of these activities are really useful, and how they might contribute to our performance. Keeping in mind that it also needs to be realistic to actually keep track of all of these things. So define what it is that you actually want to track at the beginning. Yep.
So this is kind of just the preview of the metric score. And there is an acronym there. That's easy to remember. I won't give it away. In the spirit of the Olympics, I just want to finish with this moment that was memorable for me, and feel free to address, our friends, because I think we have to end within an hour. I think this was a great moment, a high jump where these two athletes were tied and they chose to share the gold medal, where they were given a choice, but they wanted to get two gold medals. And in the beginning, I thought, hey, this is a competition. There's no clear winner. But after reading, realized they were best friends, and that's what they wanted to demonstrate, the sportsmanship, the value of sportsmanship to young athletes, next generation athletes. So it's possible to, redefine, I think, competition and go from competition to collaboration. And this example I found was very memorable to me with Gianmarco Tamberi and Murtaz Barshim, which I hadn't seen before. So
yeah, I remember watching it live. Actually, it was amazing. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it live while it was on. It was great.
Yeah. Well, let me know if you have any final comments. I want to leave the last words to you, but I'm very glad that a lot of our friends showed up, commented. Thank you so much. We'll have many more of these. Will, Angela?
No, I just
Thanks
thank you for your
for
time
having me.
Yeah. And I'm excited to see where this goes. I feel like we're kind of on the beginning with the MPI. I think there's lots of opportunity to utilize it and make this even better.
Yep. Thank you very much. Yeah, glad to be
agreed.
here with you.
Thanks for the opportunity to contribute, and really interested to see future discussions on the MPI. But also, I know you've got a lot of other topics
Sure.
planned, Tim. So I'll definitely check in and listen to those. It would be really nice to see perhaps some more senior management medical affairs professionals give their thoughts on the MPI rather than just MSLs as well, and see what they think might be the challenges or advantages to this.
Sure. Yep. And
thank you.
Thank you very much. More to come at the MAPS meeting. Join MAPS, everyone. We have a mentorship program there as well. So absolutely. So I'll just acknowledge some gratitude here from Carol. She enjoyed the meeting, and Mary Lynn as well. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the Olympics, and let's redefine competition and collaboration as well, regardless of whether or not we're in medical affairs or what industry. Yep.
I thank you.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Angela.